This video and the next video, possibly the one after that, we're going to spend looking at doing color correction and color grading. Color grading is the process by which you apply a look to a film, whereas color correction is the process by which you fix things that are wrong, right? Um, they're literally the same process, but you'll hear both terms thrown about. If you're working in a cinematic universe, it tends to be color grading. If you're working in a video production universe, it tends to be color correction. But the terms are to some degree interchangeable. They do the same job, they just have different philosophical approaches. DaVinci Resolve was originally made as a color grading tool, so this is an area in which it shines. Um, there's a limit to how much of that shine we'll get to explore in this class, but you should know that the possibilities here are deep. And many professional colorists and professional color houses use DaVinci Resolve as their primary tool. So I've started a new project here, and I have a series of shots. We'll just take a quick look at these on the timeline. I sent a student outside and asked for some messed up footage, right? So here we have a shot of my backyard that's underexposed. This one is more or less properly exposed. We have one here that the white balance is off. This one, the white balance looks a little bit off. It looks a little bit hot. This one is terribly overexposed. And then this last shot is simply a pan of Diamond Head. Um, that's not terribly impressive, but we'll see what we can do about that. Everything starts by coming down to the bottom of the screen and selecting the color page. Right, so I'll do that and launch the interface. Now, before we get into actually using anything, let's take a minute and look at the different areas of this page. Okay, so in this upper left-hand corner, as is the case in every page, we have a series of buttons that we can choose to look at different aspects of the project, right? So this gallery view, you'll notice it says no stills created. As I move through this, as I'm creating different looks and different levels of creation, or different levels of correction rather, I may grab images, and these images will be used as references further down the road. We probably won't do any of that in this first video, but as I did that, they would pop up here. The second one, LUTs, L-U-T, stands for Look Up Table. So there are things that are preset. If I know for a fact that I shot on a Blackmagic Design camera, for example, I can click my Blackmagic and it will pop up a bunch of predefined settings based on other people's experience with that camera. Likewise, if I had shot with an ARRI, I don't have nearly as many here, but this would take the native raw footage, which is very flat and not very fun to look at, and put it out as a different standard, the REC 709 color standard. If you're a professional colorist, this makes a lot of sense. If you kind of know what's going on, which is where I am, I kind of know what this is all about, and if it sounds like Greek, don't worry about it. Media pool you've seen before. This is a way I can look at my raw things. This timeline button, as you'll see, turns on and off one of the timeline interfaces in the middle of the screen there. I might do that just to gain a little more real estate up top. For the now, we'll leave it here. This center area, your viewing window, you've seen your viewing window all the way through the project. This one works in a similar way. It's got the playback controls, as you would expect. There is a little drop-down menu here that allows me to choose some different options. We won't get to these in this first video, but we may, before the semester's over, come back and revisit this. By default, it turns onto this eyedropper tool that they call the qualifier. I don't know why it's called a qualifier. They call it the qualifier. This right-hand window, we've got some new stuff going on here. This is called nodes, N-O-D-E-S, nodes, and this is my first node on my color correction pathway. You can think of nodes like stepping stones in a way, or just a sequence of events. When we get into creating a look, this will become more useful. When we're simply doing color correction, it's rare that you would have to add additional nodes, but it could happen, right? But again, up here in the top right-hand corner, there's buttons I can turn on and off. So you can see I can actually disable that node display if I wanted to. This turns that clips version of the timeline on and off. So between this button and this timeline button over here on the left, right, I could free up a lot of space to get a bigger viewer window if I wanted to. The little drop-down window here gives me a way to sort stuff on my timeline. And this could come in very handy. At the moment, I'm looking at every clip on the timeline, which is a sensible enough thing to do. But there are other ways that I could do this, including I can look at things I haven't graded yet, or I can look at things I already have graded, right? So if I had a lot of shots and maybe I have lost track of which ones I fixed and which ones I haven't, I could click on this and look at only the ungraded clips. So at the moment that changed nothing because all of my clips are ungraded. I'm going to put that back to the all. OpenFX opens up in a window where I can apply some special effects. We will definitely not be playing with that one right now. And Lightbox just gives me a different way to look at these things. Across the bottom, this large area here with the color wheels, and underneath it there's a row of interfaces as well. These 4 color wheels are really instrumental in a lot of what I'm going to be doing. And there's different ways to look at these. So the colors, or the control ranges, is called lift, gamma, gain, and offset. These to some degree correspond with lift as being our darks, gamma as being our mid-ranges, gain as being the highlights, and offset controls the entire image. We will do this again, don't worry. I can look at the same information in more than one way, though. I can come down here and change it from primary wheels to primary bars. This is the same information, it's just displayed in a different way. And there is a third option here, log, which again, same information displayed in a different way. Although this looks very similar to the first one, doesn't it? And I don't know if you noticed this little indicator light change. So I can actually change between these looks by clicking on this little window here. Underneath the wheels, there are some things that we could adjust, right? So contrast, pivot, saturation, hue, luminance mix. And there are actually 2 pages of these. If I click on the number 2 here, right, we get a new set: temperature, tint, mid-range definition, color boost, shadows, highlights. Most of what I'm going to be doing can be done with only these sets of controls here. But it's not the only way to interface with it. This center section here, the curves section, very powerful. It's another way to interface. I can do the same sorts of controls using curves that I can do with the color wheels. It's basically a different way of envisioning the changes that I'm making. Curves can allow you to be very, very artsy. And you'll notice again there's a drop down here, so I can look at not only the curves, but there's a number of different interfaces hiding in here. And again, it changes with these little buttons at the top. These little buttons, these little icons here, lights, as if it were, correspond to the choices inside here. And then over here in the bottom right-hand corner, we have our scopes. Again, there's a drop-down menu that lets me choose what kind of scope I'm looking at. The parade, which is what you see right now. You can look at a waveform monitor. You can look at a vector scope. I can look at a histogram. And I can look at this interesting color space graphic. Honestly, I don't know how to work with this particular one. And in addition to that, just to the right of that drop-down menu, you'll see that there are some options. So I can change how I'm looking at the color space. This little color, as you can see in the background, it's turning on and off the colors in my monitor there. the brightness here is the brightness. So the information as it's displayed on the graph is called the trace. And this is archaic. This is back when this used to be a piece of almost like a television screen, and there was a knob for the brightness of the trace, which is that, and there's a knob for the brightness of the screen itself. Right. So this makes the demarcations on the graph brighter or darker, while this one makes the information on the graph brighter or darker. That's just kind of for playing around with. And show reference levels on. It's really hard to see this, but there we go. You can see that line moving up and down. I can set my bottom where my black point is going to be if I need that as a reference level. And likewise, I can set my top where I want my white point to be. I know, you haven't heard of these before. That's fine. To get out of this, I just click somewhere outside of it. Now, this particular scope runs from 0 to 1023. When you find scopes like this, some form of waveform monitor, which is what this is, a waveform monitor, there are different ways that they're calibrated. Old school television, they were based on percentage, and the scale went from negative 20% to 120%. And your video needed to be between 0 and 100. Actually, it needed to be between 7.5 and 100. When computers first started coming into this, you would see these things calibrated from 1 to 511, or 0 to 511, right? So it was based on the color space at the time. So 0 to 1023 happens to be the number of steps in a 10-bit color recording, right? So this is 2 to the 10th is 1024, but because we started at 0, it's 0 to 1023. Okay, here's what you need to know. 0, bad. 1023, bad. Things in the middle, good. The scopes give you an objective way to look at your picture. So if I come and click on a different image here, so I'm going to look at this first image. From left to right, and I'm going to change this. The parade is actually giving me 3 scopes compressed into one. So here is the brightness of my red channel, the brightness of my green channel, and the brightness of my blue channel subdivided. If I change this display and I go to a typical waveform monitor, it all becomes one piece of information. And you can see that the red, the green, and the blue information are encoded differently based on color. And I can actually turn that color on and off. I'm not sure why I would ever want to turn it off. But if you look from left to right at a waveform monitor and you look at left to right on the screen, you're seeing the same thing. All right, so let me go to a second view here. And I'm just going to go back to the parade. I like looking at the parade. What this is showing me is brightness, but it goes from left to right on the screen. So if I come back to this first image, I can see that the brightest part of the screen, there's something bright on the left little bit of the screen. That's what these little red, green, and blue shelves are. And that is this tint. That's this white gleaming tint that I'm seeing as we go left to right. And then you can see that the brightness kind of swoops up as we move towards the right. That's a little bit of wispiness of clouds coming up here. If I look at this second one again, you can see that there's some bright clouds here in the sky. Looking on the monitor, we can see that as it gets to the right-hand side, that little diagonal line right there is probably that wisp of clouds. And again, this bright white shelf here, this bright white tint shows up right in there. Actually, if I'm lying to you, it's up here at the top. It's compressed against the very top of the screen there, right there, 1023. If I go to something that has some motion on it and I play it, watch the waveform monitors. Okay, at some point we pan here. Okay, there we go. So you can actually see the image, except what you're seeing is simply a graph of brightness, right? So there, that's the outline, the inverse outline of the mountains as the more and more clouds are showing up. We're getting more and more of that brightness. Here's the actual shadow, right? So that's the outline of Diamond Head right there. Okay, We can manipulate a lot of things here, and we'll start by talking in the next video about what we need to manipulate and why. Hopefully this has given you at least enough of just an overview of the screen, what the controls are, where they're laid out. So as we start moving through and using these, you'll have at least a little familiarity with how to make the screen look the way it looks.